Picture this. 520 soldiers boxed in hostile terrain, ammo running dry, enemy fire stitching every ridge. Command already drafting casualty lists. Doctrine said wait. Protocol said hold. But one pilot refused the script. This is the story of Captain Elena Torres, the aviator dismissed as a support staff, who gripped the stick of her Thunderbolt and carved a corridor of survival through Raven's Gorge. In the chow hall of Fort Ironcliff, laughter bounced off concrete walls. Soldiers joked, traded stories, loaded trays. But apart from the noise sat Elena, cross-legged on a torp, flight helmet beside her, kneeboard balanced on her lap. At 28, barely 5'2", she moved with deliberate precision. Where others flaunted swagger, she radiated control. Her Thunderbolt wasn't just a machine, it was an extension of her discipline. Dismissed as too small, too quiet, she was relegated to logistics and comms. Mascot pilot, some sneered. But while others smoked and joked, Elena built her own doctrine in silence, memorizing terrain under red light, logging cannon harmonics, fuel burns, and wind shifts. Her kneeboard became scripture. When orders came to sweep Raven's Gorge, 520 soldiers rolled in with confidence. Elena saw the trap in the contour lines, kill zones waiting to close. She raised her hand in briefing, "Sir, this valley is a coffin." Colonel Briggs barely glanced. "Captain, track radios, not strategy." Laughter followed. Hours later, radios cracked with panic. "Taking fire, East Ridge. Pinned down, casualties mounting." Protocol said wait. Manual said hold. Elena whispered, "I can end this." No one listened. So she walked out, helmet under her arm, boots steady against the dust. Her Thunderbolt climbed low and shallow, hugging terrain she had rehearsed 1,000 times. From Overwatch, the valley was a wound. She lined up the GAU-8 cannon, breathed once, and cut down the first gun pit. Silence fell. Then rocket-stitched corridors where none existed. Each pass wasn't subtraction, it was addition. Seconds bought. Space opened. The killbox frayed. On the net, disbelief spread. "Who's covering us?" A Comtech whispered, "Phantom 304. The name froze the channel. Phantom 304 wasn't a joke, it was a legend from training rooms, tied to impossible low runs and uncanny accuracy. Colonel Briggs stared at the feed, realization dawning. The pilot they had sidelined was rewriting the battlefield. Helicopters dropped into the corridor she carved. Soldiers sprinted, dragged wounded, covered each other. Commander Holt's voice thundered, "Phantom 304 has us covered. 0 left behind." When Elena taxied back, silence lined the flight path. No smirks. Helmets tucked under arms. Respect heavy in the air. Colonel Briggs stood rigid. "You disobeyed orders," he said. Elena met his eyes. "Yes, sir." His voice cracked. "You saved a battalion." Commander Holt stepped forward, grime streaking his uniform, and saluted. "Phantom 304. The Gorge owes you." Boots stomped, hands clapped, voices murmured like a hymn. Elena didn't gloat. She lowered her eyes. "I was just doing my duty." And so the story lived on. "We should have died in Raven's Gorge," soldiers would say. But Phantom 304 was watching. The dust had barely settled when Captain Elena Torres stripped her Thunderbolt down in the hangar. Fuel burns logged, cannon bursts tallied, every number in its place. Outside, the compound carried a silence too heavy to break. Soldiers who once mocked her now stood straighter, their eyes following her with respect they couldn't put into words. Colonel Briggs lingered near the hangar doors, posture rigid, jaw locked. He had already admitted she saved them, but the weight of his earlier dismissal pressed harder than any reprimand. He stepped forward, voice low. "You rewrote the fight, Captain." "I won't forget that." Elena nodded once, steady, her father's dog tag tapping against her vest like a heartbeat. Commander Holt gathered the battalion that evening. Dust still clung to uniforms, bandages wrapped fresh wounds, but every man and woman stood to hear him speak. "We should have died in Raven's Gorge," he said, voice carrying across the courtyard. But Phantom 304 refused to let protocol bury us. Remember that name. Remember that courage. Boots stomped in rhythm, not as applause but as a vow. Soldiers murmured her call sign like a hymn. Phantom 304. The pilot who turned a coffin into a corridor. Elena didn't bask in it. She sat alone later, kneeboard open, pencil scratching new notes. Geometry of the gorge, wind shifts logged, harmonics recalculated. Recognition was noise. Accuracy was duty. She had done what her training demanded, what her father's lessons had etched into her bones. Elena didn't bask in it. She sat alone later, kneeboard open, pencil scratching new notes. Geometry of the gorge, wind shifts logged, harmonics recalculated. Recognition was noise. Accuracy was duty. She had done what her training demanded, what her father's lessons had etched into her bones. Weeks passed, but Raven's Gorge never left the battalion. Every patrol carried echoes of that day, the sudden silence after cannon bursts, the corridor carved through fire, the voice on the net whispering Phantom 304. Captain Elena Torres kept her routine unchanged. Kneeboard open, pencil scratching, numbers logged with the same quiet discipline. But outside her hangar, the world had shifted. Soldiers who once mocked her now sought her counsel. Young lieutenants asked her to walk them through terrain maps. Sergeants leaned in when she spoke. Respect had replaced dismissal. Colonel Briggs, once rigid in his doubt, began inviting her into strategy briefings. At first, the room was tense, men waiting for the old hierarchy to reassert itself. But when Elena traced contour lines and explained wind shifts, silence followed, not laughter. Her words carried weight now, not because she demanded it, but because Raven's Gorge had proven her doctrine. Commander Holt pushed harder. Phantom 304 isn't just a pilot, he told the brigade staff. She's a tactician. She sees geometry where others see maps. Slowly, her role expanded. No longer sidelined to comms, she became the quiet architect of flight plans and overwatch strategies. Yet Elena herself remained unchanged. She didn't chase recognition. She didn't bask in the new respect. She carried her father's dog tag against her vest, logged every flight with precision, and reminded herself that accuracy mattered more than applause. But the battalion carried her story like scripture. In barracks, soldiers retold it, "We should have died in Raven's Gorge." Phantom 304 was watching. In chow halls, her call sign was spoken with reverence. And in the silence before patrols, men steadied themselves with the memory of cannon bursts that had cut corridors through chaos. For Elena, it wasn't vindication. It wasn't glory. It was duty. And duty, once fulfilled, demanded the same patience and discipline for the next fight. News of Raven's Gorge spread faster than any official report. Soldiers carried it in their voices, retelling the moment when Phantom 304 carved a corridor through fire. Within weeks, the story reached other bases, whispered in chow halls and briefing rooms. At Fort Ironcliff, Elena Torres remained unchanged. Kneeboard open, pencil scratching, numbers logged with quiet precision. But invitations began arriving. Requests from other units to review terrain, to lecture on low-altitude tactics, to explain how geometry could rewrite doctrine. Colonel Briggs, once her harshest skeptic, now introduced her at staff meetings with a tone edged in respect. "Captain Torres sees what maps don't," he said. "Listen carefully." Commanders who had dismissed her before leaned forward when she spoke. Soon, the brigade commander summoned her. "Phantom 304, he said, using her call sign deliberately, "your method saved lives. We want them standardized. Write the manual." Elena hesitated. Manuals were doctrine, and doctrine had once caged her. But she accepted, not for recognition, but for accuracy. She spent nights drafting tables, diagrams, and flight profiles. Her kneeboard transformed into a doctrine others could follow. Geometry became policy. Precision became survival. Meanwhile, soldiers carried her legend further. In barracks across the region, they told the same line: "We should have died in Raven's Gorge." Phantom 304 was watching. For Elena, it was never about legend. It was about duty. And duty, once fulfilled, demanded patience for the next fight. She knew valleys would close again, killboxes would form again, and soldiers would wait for courage to break silence. And when that moment came, Phantom 304 would be ready. Months later, Raven's Gorge had become more than a battle, it was a lesson. Training academies dissected the footage, instructors replayed her low-altitude passes, and cadets whispered her call sign like a challenge. Phantom 304 was no longer just a pilot, she was a doctrine. Elena Torres herself remained unchanged. She still sat alone in hangars, kneeboard open, pencil scratching, dog tag tapping against her vest. But now, her notes were copied into manuals, her diagrams pinned to classroom walls. What she had once written in silence under red light became the foundation for new survival tactics. At Fort Ironcliff, soldiers carried themselves differently. They no longer mocked the quiet pilot. Instead, they sought her guidance before patrols, asking her to walk them through terrain lines, wind shifts, and firing angles. Respect had replaced dismissal. Colonel Briggs, once rigid in his doubt, now stood beside her in briefings. "Captain Torres sees geometry where others see maps," he said. His voice carried conviction, not hesitation. Commander Holt pushed harder, lobbying for her methods to be adopted across the brigade. And slowly, the legend spread. Other bases began requesting her presence. Other battalions asked for her counsel. Her call sign traveled farther than she did, whispered in chow halls hundreds of miles away. But Elena never chased the legend. She carried her father's lessons, her scars, her discipline. For her, Raven's Gorge was not glory, it was accuracy. She had seen the geometry, solved it, and saved lives. That was enough. Yet the soldiers who lived because of her carried something more. In their retellings, the story grew into a vow: "We should have died in Raven's Gorge." But Phantom 304 was watching. And somewhere in the silence of her hangar, Elena Torres prepared for the next valley, the next killbox, the next moment when courage would have to break protocol.